Hello and welcome to Holyrood Sources. We're recording on Wednesday the 28th of August. I'm Calum Macdonald. Thank you for being with us on the podcast. And we're revving our engines for a new parliamentary session, actually. So welcome back if you've been here all the way through the last 18 months of this podcast. If you are brand new, you are very welcome. Press subscribe for free to stick with the podcast and get every single episode, of which there are going to be quite a few, actually, in the next couple of weeks or so. You'll get every single episode delivered straight to your feed. Here to make the podcast what it is are Geoff Aberdein, former Chief of Staff to Alex Salmond when he was First Minister. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Good morning.
Good morning. Right, nice to have you both back. Geoff, how was your holiday? Where were you on holiday?
Well, I was at my visiting my fiance's family in Gdańsk in Poland. I've got to tell you guys that every time I go there, I never fail to be impressed by the different developments that they're undertaking. This is a city that was behind the Iron Curtain 35 years ago, and it has revitalised, rejuvenised unbelievably. So the city centre in Gdańsk is stunning itself. And they have this new World War II museum next to their Solidarity Museum. Of course, that was the birthplace of the Solidarity movement as well. Fantastic places. It's a very young, up-and-coming, aspirational town. They've changed some of their shipbuilding yards into trendy street markets, with basketball areas and all the rest of it. And it just got me thinking, every time that creative joined up thinking about the need to improve your cities, and that's something that we face in Scotland and across the UK just now in terms of city centres that are in some cases dying in their arse. And so we really do need to think creatively about how we bring people back into the city centre. And I tell you what, going to Gdańsk wouldn't be the worst place to start.
Yeah, it's really. I was reading a thing the other day, actually, Geoff. I saw you in Aberdein this week, and Union Street in Aberdein is perhaps becoming quite famous for the number of empty shops that are lingering around there, empty storefronts.
And Kat, it's a great point. I mean, and Princes Street, and there's some similar commentary about that. Obviously the problems in Glasgow and Dundee. There's a lot of similar problems here. The death of retail, yeah. COVID accelerating that. I would say about Union Street, though, in fairness, the UK government gave money for the new marketplace, which is about to start work, which hopefully will open up the corridor into the train station. Thanks to my colleague Ryan Crichton, he's leading our Save Our Union Street. The actual number of let shops are basically doing up all the empty ones and preparing them with some incentives for businesses to come in, discounted rates and all the rest of it. So we're actually at a much lower level, but yeah, we need venues. We don't need retail. We need venues, reasons for people to come in, things to do, things to see. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of wealth in Aberdein, as we all know, but the city centre does not befit that reputation at all.
Yeah, inspiration from Gdańsk. I like that. Right,
and I mean it.
Yeah,
please.
well, fair.
I mean, I genuinely mean it. Listen, the council leaders, take a trip over there. Yeah. It's amazing, stunning place.
Totally fair. Nice one. Well, welcome back. Nice to have you back, Geoff. Lots to come. So on Friday, just to mention, we're going to be recording our podcast at the pub. It is SNP Party Conference over the course of this coming weekend. And so we'll be recording on Friday night so you can hear our episode on Saturday. And if you've not ever heard one of our party conference podcasts at the pub, basically it's a big kind of drop-in conversation session for politicians and journalists and pundits and advisors, all sorts of people you'll hear on the podcast. Who will come and sit with us in the corner of the pub for a few minutes on Friday, and you'll hear that on Saturday in your podcast feed. And this time next week, we're recording a Scottish Conservative Party leadership special. Andy, do you want to tell us a little bit about this? We've got the three candidates now to be Scottish Conservative Party leader who will join us on the podcast next week for, I'm not calling it a debate because it's not going to be that. There might be disagreement, that's fine, but it's going to be very Holyrood Sources conversational between these three. I wonder, will we hear differences? Are there differences between the three candidates?
Yes, I think there probably are. I mean, obviously they're all standing for the same party, so you're going to see broad similarity, but there have been quite a number of policy announcements by the candidates in the papers over the last few weeks. They've kind of had their run of the press, to be honest with you, because there's not been that much else going on, so they've actually got quite a lot of coverage between them of their policies and what they've been saying. So I think there will be some agreement on that. I think there will undoubtedly be some difference in terms of their views in the performance of the party as a structure. And I think you will see debate along the lines of kind of change versus continuity on that basis. Ultimately, what really needs to be asked is the question of how they're going to put their money where their mouth is, because all of them, actually, all three of them have said that it's no longer enough just to be the anti-independence party. They need to be something else. They need to be for something instead of just against something. They've all said it. I mean, we've been saying this for many, many years in some cases, but they've been saying it recently. But that's the headline. What we haven't heard is the first paragraph or the second paragraph or the third paragraph that sits underneath that. And we'll tease that out. As you say, it's not a debate. We're not going to be giving everybody 35 seconds to give their answers and cross-examination. It's just going to be an open discussion, and let's see how they go.
Genuine question. I have been off on holiday, be fair. So I'm very surprised here there's only 3 candidates. What's happened since I've been away? Who are they?
Did it not
genuinely,
did it not make the Polish news?
I'm not joking. I didn't think this was coming up today, so I've been Googling furiously. Who the hell are these people?
We had
who's left?
Brian Whittle, Liam Kerr, and Jamie Green all dropped out and backed Murdo Fraser. Brian Whittle and Jamie Green dropped out. Brian Whittle dropped out a couple of days before nominations closed. Jamie Green and Liam Kerr backed Murdo the day that nominations closed. Liam Kerr actually got the required number of nominations, so he could have been standing if he wanted to, but he took the decision to unite behind Murdo. So that's what happened when you were away, Jeffrey.
So it's Murdo Fraser, Megan Gallagher, and Russell Finlay are the 3 that are
guessing. So what's your hunch, Andy? I mean, does the endorsements for Murdo Fraser change things?
I think fundamentally probably not. I mean, I think this is Russell Finlay's, and that, he's going to win. That's what's going to happen, for all sorts of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into next week. But I find it quite the avenue for anybody else except Russell Finlay to win is very, very narrow and quite difficult to see.
Are you going to endorse anyone publicly, Andrew?
Well, I don't care. I mean, this is the key point.
You don't care, yet you're wearing my I Heart Murdo t-shirt.
No, I mean, it doesn't make any difference to... The reason it doesn't make any difference to me is because I have never been a party person. I am somebody from the centre-right, and I have an interest in seeing the centre-right get themselves in a position where they can be part of a Scottish government, which they never ever have been before. We are unique in Europe. We're the only country in Europe where there is no party of the centre-right that gets into government. And I would like us not to be unique in that respect. I don't want us to be a European leader in that. I'd like us to be a European leader in other things, but I don't want us to be a European leader in that. And because the Scottish Conservative Party can't ever get into government, it makes no difference to me who wins this contest. I don't care.
I'm going to struggle next week. One, to adequately present somebody that actually cares who wins this contest, and secondly, what questions to ask.
I mean, just well, I know we weren't necessarily going to be talking about this in depth this week, but while we're on it, I don't want. I'm not trying to sound flippant. The centre right is really important. Countries need a centre right, and all our peers around us have a strong centre-right. The Irish have strong centre-right. All the Scandinavian countries have strong centre-right parties. We pretend that they're somehow left-wing. That's total baloney. They all have strong centre-right parties, and they're very often in government in these countries as well. Countries need a strong centre-right, and we're seeing at the moment, with the fiscal problems the Scottish Government is having, there's no centre-right counterbalance to the current fiscal policy of the Scottish Government. Right? There's a unionist counterbalance to it, in the form of Labour, but it's not a centre-right counterbalance. It's just different centre-left parties with a different constitutional outlook. So having a centre-right balance is critically important for all countries. So this should be an important leadership contest, because it should be the leadership contest for the leader of the centre-right who could become the First Minister. But it's not, and that's why it doesn't matter.
We will talk more about that next week. So I just meant that by way of a preview of what was coming next week. But nice, good discussion. Right, let's get stuck into what we want to talk about.
Well, you did ask the question.
No, I did deliberately. And I know you've always got good things to say.
And totally exposed my lack of knowledge about anything, really.
It's all right, you've got a week. You've got a week
Again.
to read up. It's all good. Right, let's get into some of the stuff that's been happening this week that we want to unpack a bit. For the first time since devolution, the biggest party at Holyrood might not form the government after the election in 2026. A poll for the Sunday Times last weekend suggests that the SNP would win the most seats and be the largest party in Holyrood, but would not have enough support to form the government. Unionist parties would likely keep them out, and that would position Anna Sarwar to be First Minister of a minority government. Geoff, this would be an unprecedented scenario at Holyrood. What are the implications of it?
Yeah, well, first things first, I think if you're the SNP, you're pretty delighted with the results, the pure top-line figures. I mean, 33% please, 30% from Labour. And that is encouraging, particularly. So it kind of suggests that there hasn't been that massive honeymoon period for the Labour Party in the UK, which has transcended the Scottish Party. Now, we take everything with a pinch of salt. It's only a poll, and we're well off, 18 months off getting into the election nitty-gritty. But I think first and foremost, the SNP will be quietly just going, thank goodness for that. OK, yes, these figures will have them not potentially in government. But if they aren't to be in government, this is exactly the result that they want. A Labour Party requiring Tory votes, requiring Liberal Democrat votes, less so because we anticipate there might be some coalition talks there, but requiring Tory votes when, I think that would be particularly challenging. It would be unprecedented. When I first saw the results actually on this, it reminded me of the 2003 Parliament, which was meant to be the Rainbow Parliament. Never really manifested itself because, Labour and Liberal had enough votes to kind of command a government. But, that was when we had 7 Greens. They made a big breakthrough. We had 6 Socialists, Margaret Macdonald, Dennis Canavan, John Swinburne, Scottish Senior Citizens Party. And now they're kind of being replaced a little bit by, if this poll's anything to go by, Reform, and I'd be grateful for Andy's views on how he thinks that impacts the Tories. And potentially Alba as well, which I'm sure we'll get into shortly, given my former boss. Quite interesting poll. If I'm Labour, I'm disappointed, no doubt about it.
Andy, top line then. So let me do the numbers actually. This suggests that the SNP would get 41, Labour would get 40, the Conservatives would get 18, the Lib Dems would get 8, Reform UK would get 8, the Greens would get 10, and Alba would get 4.
Let me start with where I agree with Geoff. I think this is a great poll for the SNP under the circumstances. I was quite surprised, if I'm being honest, but I don't suppose we should be surprised because there's always been reason to believe that the SNP vote is pretty sticky. And remember, it's PR, not first past the post, and they polled 30% in the general election, so you're always going to get a decent number of seats on that basis. I think from the SNP's point of view, I think they should be looking at, they're heading into party conference this weekend. They're pretty glum, right? But let's be honest, they're pretty upset with life. I think they should look at this poll and say, do you know what? We are not out of this. Despite everything that's happened over the last couple of years, we are not actually out of this yet. Labour could have a tough year and a half at Westminster. We're already starting to see that yesterday with Starmer's speech in the Rose Garden. They may not be a wildly popular government. People are, I'm sure, are glad that they're in and not the Tories, but they may not be wildly popular. I think the SNP we've not really had a chance to see Swinney and Forbes in action yet. They got in and then suddenly it's the election straight away and then suddenly it's the fallout from the election and we haven't really had a chance to see them yet. They may perform a lot better. We always said at the time that there was a chance that they would. And I think if they can make clear to the population that they understand that for the last 3 or 4 years the SNP has been a poorly performing government, especially in the times when they were in with the Greens. If they can make people understand that they get that, and they understand how to turn it round, and they're prepared to turn it round and do things more sensibly and cut out the frivolity and get on to the real stuff that matters. They are not out of this yet, and I think they should be quite encouraged by that. And conversely, I think Sarwar should be looking at this and saying, do you know what? It might have worked at Westminster to say, put us in because we're not the other guys. That was a pretty compelling message at Westminster. It's not enough at Holyrood. I don't think it's going to be enough. The SNP may be on the slide, but they are not on the slide as fast as the Tories were at Westminster earlier this year. So I think it's encouraging for the SNP. Just quickly before, because I'm interested to know what Geoff thinks about that, but just quickly before Geoff comes back in, on the system itself, this is the system. It's in the Scotland Act. You have to win twice to be First Minister. You've got to do well enough in the country to be able to put together a majority in the Parliament, and then you have to get the MSPs in the Parliament voting for you to become First Minister. So a party which actually is not the largest party, but which can put together a majority and get voted for to be First Minister, that's the rules. There's nothing illegitimate. Now, I'm not saying it might not fly very well in the country. I'm not saying that the SNP, if they win more seats but don't form the government, wouldn't be able to make some campaigning points about that. But we should clarify at this point, because it's going to be important for the purposes of reporting over the next couple of years if this happens. That is the system. There's nothing illegitimate about that at all. That's the way it is supposed to work. It's in the Scotland Act. So we should not fall into the trap of somehow... I mean, yes, the SNP might use it as a campaigning point, but it's not a legislative point. It's not a legitimate point.
Yeah. If I may just come in on the numbers, right? Because we shouldn't be surprised that the SNP are actually polling 33% here, actually. If you look at the 9 polls between when John Swinney was elected First Minister and the general election, 6 of those polls, the SNP polled 33%, across different companies, 33%, and they polled again 33%. And this is all for the Scottish Parliament, obviously. Now, in the Labour instance, in those 9 polls, their average was well up on 30, so they were polling 37, 35, 34% in those 9 polls, and then they have kind of dipped into 30%. Now we need to see more of these polls to suggest if that's actually a trend that's emerging. But I agree with Andy. I think, you know, the greatest asset for Sarwar was the UK campaign to get the Tories out. Huge coverage about the need for change. He managed to ride the coattails there and outperform his colleagues down south with that momentum. But now we've seen Labour in government. Let's be honest with you. I mean, we've just had a message from Keir Starmer, perhaps we'll get into it, that things are going to get worse before they get better. It's a bit of a dichotomy on Blair's things are going to get better, just stick with us, we'll be okay. I think I would have preferred that messaging if I were Starmer's advisors. And perhaps people are just looking at it again and going, actually, this is a different contest. Not overly enthused with what I've seen at Westminster, and then they dip down to 30%. So, look, it's still encouraging for the Labour Party because they're making significant gains on these numbers from the last Scottish election poll. But privately, I know Sarwar will go to that should be further up than this. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this manifests itself. Final point about, and I don't want to get too much into this because we'll talk about this on Friday at the SNP conference. But this programme for government, what an opportunity for John Swinney and Kate Forbes to really establish themselves. This is who we are and this is what we're going to pursue. I used the word conviction a lot when Humza was First Minister. Perhaps I was a bit too tough on him at times, but I just felt he lacked conviction what he was doing. I really do think this is the time for conviction. There's going to be a lot of difficult decisions here. And the Labour Party are giving the SNP a little bit of a get out if they play the politics accurately. Because they're saying things are going to be so tough. This budget's going to be terrible, Starmer tells us. It is going to be really tough. The SNP need to show, really play that politics well and say, look, we're going to do what we can to stand up for Scotland, but they've got their hands on the tiller. This is going to be really tough. And then get to a lot more positive programme, bold programme for government, and perhaps get rid of some of the nonsense as we've talked about previously.
Yeah. Do you know though, I think they can actually make that work for them. So there was a few announcements when you were away, Geoff, but one of them that I thought was interesting was that the Scottish Government are effectively cutting public health advertising budgets. So, wear your seatbelt, don't eat a cup of sugar every morning when you wake up, right? that sort of stuff. Who's going to miss that? Do we want our money to be spent on that when times are tough? I think they can own some of these issues and say, you know what, we have been wasting a bit of money recently and we're really sorry about that, but we're going to rectify that now. We're going to stop spending money on crap. I think they can own that issue. I really do. There's an awful lot, we talk about public spending constraints. There is an awful lot of money being wasted in this country on stuff that has no impact at all. No proven impact whatsoever. They could very, very easily save significant amounts of money. And they could make a virtue of it. So, I think, and the other thing, to be honest, is they don't have a choice, right? They might have done okay on this poll, but it's still projecting them not to be in government. So they've got to do something about their situation anyway. As we said in a couple of podcasts ago, if you're going to go down, you may as well go down swinging. They've been in government for a long time. They've got 18 months to try to get one more term. And they're not going to do it by repeating the mistakes that they've made over the last few years. So, I really think they can own some of these issues, make a virtue of the savings that they're making, and the money that they're not spending anymore because they want to make sure it gets spent on stuff that's more worthwhile, because there's plenty of frivolity to cut, I can tell you that.
See, I think that there's an outstanding question in my head about who the SNP are now. I reflect on the 2011 election, and there's Bernard Ponsonby brilliantly did his kind of broadcast at the top of the news programme to say what happened in the election results, and he said the SNP had become a party of the urban and the rural, the north and the south, the east and west, the left, the centre left and the centre right. And we had actually become a national party for Scotland. That meant to say that you might not like everything we do depending on which demographic you're in or which location you're in, but there was something that people could attach themselves to, that the SNP were doing at the time. And we really shined with that, and we spoke to that National Party of Scotland ethos. I think there's a lot of folk within the parliamentary group, within party, that maybe just either don't remember that or perhaps weren't around at that time and are thinking, actually, we are the SNP and we're going to out-left Labour, or we're going to try and stick to our social provision credentials. All very honourable, but perhaps they should reflect on what made us successful in the first instance in 2007 and 11, and it was trying to speak to all Airts and Pairts. Bang in the middle, reach out to the centre left, reach out to the centre right with your policy proposals so that you could establish yourself as a National Party for Scotland. And it'd just be so interesting to see if John and Kate in the next couple of weeks and months try and play to that record that we previously had, or do they try and chart a different course depending on where the party feels it's at? A really interesting week ahead, actually. I think it could be very challenging at the weekend. A lot of angry ex-parliamentarians, and I've noticed a lot of commentary about what's gone wrong, and there's not a lot of agreement.
Yeah.
There's issues here, there's HQ, lack of support and advice and guidance and resources. We focused too much on this. No, we didn't. We focused too much on that. That's a very difficult situation to be in. I tell you need to get beyond that very quickly and move forward to what you're going to do, not what you didn't do previously.
Do you know what's layered on top of that as well, right? And this gets back to the very start of this conversation, is the fact that it's PR, an additional member system. Because no matter, even if the SNP overperform what we think they're going to do, they are still losing loads of central belt seats to Labour. They're losing loads of urban constituencies to Labour. They need the list. They need the party list, and that means they need to appeal outside the central belt, because they need to get seats in the northeast, in the Highlands and Islands. They need to get seats in the south of Scotland, and they're going to get a lot more seats off the party list this year than they did the last time when they won all the constituencies. That's what they're going to be quite heavily dependent on. You're not going to get those seats if you still appear to be a mega urban party which doesn't understand life outside the central belt. So they have to change.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good point. I mean, essentially that's what the SNP needed in 2007. We didn't have that many constituencies, but we just ran it up on the list, and we had Alex Salmond for First Minister on the list vote. Did that again in 2011 actually, but the second vote strategy is going to be all crucial here. You're absolutely right, Andy, because I think there is going to be constituencies that fall, and
that's the big advantage of John and Kate. I mean, Humza and Patrick Harvey, not exactly your rural guys, right? John Swinney and Kate Forbes, you can't say, you can say what you want about John Swinney and Kate Forbes, they understand life outside the Central Belt, so I think they can appeal in a much broader way.
You still need to run up the regional, the list vote in urban areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. So
you need to, but you do need to consolidate your whatever your 33, 34%, whatever it is, on the list to ensure that you get the overhang from the list. Yeah.
What about Anna Sarwar in all of this as well, then? Because the suggestion here is that he would become First Minister, this poll is indicating. But there's a couple of quirks to that. One, why can't he get over the line himself? He's going to need the support of other parties. I also caught this in the record, that one insider said winning 35% of the vote is the magic number, but a senior party figure said the optics of Anna Sarwar needing the Tories in any crunch vote to become First Minister would be bad and would be exploited by the SNP. How much is that a potential issue, Andy, that he's going to have to corral support from the other unionist parties, and is that a good or a bad thing? That's kind of how the Scottish Parliament works to an extent, isn't it?
So again, we need the 65 votes is the majority, right?
Yep.
There's only been one majority government, which was Salmond in 2011. It often gets
I've just called it the Aberdein government. I prefer that. Salmond jumped ship. He jumped ship, so he doesn't get the credit anymore.
Yeah, you're the sole survivor. And a lot of people talk about that sort of having broken the system, which is not really correct, to be honest. As our friend at Ballot Box Scotland, Alan Faulds, would point out to you, it wasn't breaking the system. They just got enough seats and votes that they could do it. However, what is true to say is that the system is specifically designed to avoid that outcome. So, I mean, realistically, to get a majority on his own, Anna Sarwar is going to need almost 50% of the vote. So it's not realistic to talk about it in terms of him having failed if he doesn't get a majority. The Parliament is designed as a PR Parliament. Maybe we should talk about that a bit later, because it hasn't actually operated as a proper PR Parliament, but that's a slightly different story. The Parliament is designed as a PR Parliament. It's designed for either coalition or minority government. So Anna Sarwar's not supposed to get 65 seats on his own. Now, I think the interesting question here is the one that surrounds the involvement of the Tories. Anna Sarwar has said he wants to run a minority government. Fine, you can say these things in the run-up to an election. Doesn't mean it's what's going to happen after an election. If Alex Cole-Hamilton and the Lib Dems get 8-10 seats, I think they'll clearly have some sort of role to play, and Anna Sarwar will be perfectly happy to incorporate them in a more open, public, formal role of some sort. The difficulty comes with the Tories, because then this gets back to the point I mentioned before about why they can't ever get into government. The reason the Tories can't ever get into government is because nobody will work with them. Right? Nobody wants to be in government.
Apart from the
Tories.
SNP, they worked with the Tories back in the day.
Well, but you see, that was the interesting thing about that. That was between 2007 and 2011. And actually, I mean, the Salmond Aberdein government managed to do very well there, because they were propped up by Annabel Goldie, but nobody really knew outside the Holyrood bubble. And that was quite deliberate. Why would Geoff and Alec want people to know the Tories were propping them up? I mean, so I think the Tories got stitched up there, to be honest with you. They got almost nothing for the agreement. They got no public recognition. They got very little behind the scenes, and it was really only the bubble that knew that government was being propped up by the Tories. But that's the key point. There was nothing ever public about it. People wanted to avoid talking about it. So Anna Sarwar will not, the Tory leader, whoever it is, will put Anna Sarwar in Bute House, because the other option for them is to put a nationalist in Bute House. So the Tory leader is going to put Anna Sarwar in Bute House, but the likely way that he or she will do that is they will do it by abstaining on the First Minister vote, so that their votes effectively don't count, and it reduces the size of the number that's needed to get a majority. That's how this will play.
Yeah, right. Couple of things. Firstly, I was joking about the Aberdein government. Stop talking about that. It was a very small spoke in a much bigger wheel. But you've got to remember, just on the Conservative point back then, you've got to remember the politics at Westminster at the time. That was a Labour government in 2007, so it suited Annabel Goldie to try and not support a Labour government up here and have a national. Of course it did. So of course that was the benefit for them ahead, and it helped, as they saw it, David Cameron coming into office in 2010. So there was political imperative there for them as they saw it. And you're quite right, we didn't talk about it from the rafters. Of course we bloody didn't. Why would you? And so that's where the skill and politics and the tactics comes in. Now, if this poll was to materialise, and let's take a pinch of salt again, it's miles off the election, but if this materialised after we've been told just yesterday by Keir Starmer we've been left an economic black hole by the incompetence of the Conservatives, 14 years of terrible dastardly rule, and then Sarwar has to go to them north of the border and go, please guys, can you get me over the line please, and a few votes. If the SNP are to lose government in 2026, this result would be a bloody good close second for them, because they just sit there and say, be my guest, crack on, vote Labour, get Tory. You can hear it already. And I mean, that's why, and by the way, that's why Anna Sarwar and Alex Cole-Hamilton will be having a couple of private chats in the not too distant future about how they can, politely, informally, not publicly, encourage each other's votes up the way. Because that's who they need, the Liberal Democrats. That's who they want and to form a coalition with, so they don't have to think and countenance about support from the Tories, particularly given the scunnered factor with the Tories that we've heard so much from the Labour Party of late.
Just want to mention...
That's what they'll need, though. I mean, they need, Labour and the Lib Dems both need to have a very, very good night for them to get to 65 between just the two of them. I don't think any poll that has been done over the last year has recorded those two parties together getting to 65. So they're still a bit away from that.
Just at this point, want to mention, this from Politico I've just caught, that Rachel Reeves is visiting manufacturers in Glasgow today and attending a CBI roundtable with Scottish businesses, and then she's doing some Scottish media stuff later on in the day. So this is the follow-up to the doom and gloom of Sir Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, that Rachel Reeves is out and about in Glasgow. I don't know, trying to make friends with businesses, trying to keep friends with business, trying to encourage business. It's just a note, I think, on that. Anybody? Thoughts? Rachel Reeves going to be a hard graft?
And there's no doubt that this is a challenging fiscal climate, no doubt about it. But I'm just not sure if I agree with the wisdom of coming in office and basically saying, we're in a lot of trouble here, things are looking very, very bad. And perhaps there's an element of expectation game here, but they've got such a huge mandate from the people. You'd like to think that they could tinge that with a bit more optimism and just balance out their narrative to say, look, things are tough, but they are going to get better, and this is how they're going to get better. Just stick with us here. Now, effectively, that is what they're saying, but the top lines that are emanating from what they're saying just now is, this is really tough, it's really bad. And then you can't help but, as a voter, go, well, this is rather deflating, isn't it? I just feel they need to get the balance in their messaging a bit better. Would be my observation.
Do you know, I was speaking to a taxi driver. Just before you come in, Andy. No, I was just going to say, and this taxi driver was like, I get that things are bad because I'm living it and I've been living it for the last few years. I don't want to hear about what they did because they're done. It's not their turn now. I want to hear about these guys, who he said I didn't vote for, were his words, but he said, I want to hear how these guys are going to make it better. I'm kind of over the fact that it's crap, because I know it's crap. That's my life. Yeah. But I want to get it better. Go on, Andy. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I kind of agreeing with both of you, but I think that there's always, every government comes in and says the previous one's made a mess of it and it's going to be really, really difficult to get better, right? So everybody does that. I think they have dwelt on that for a little bit too long, as you and Geoff have both indicated there. But I think there's a way out of it, and this will be what business wants to hear today. And the way out of it is through leveraging private finance. So we're never going to invest in anything for the foreseeable future if we're relying on tax receipts, okay? Because the answer is always going to be, sorry, we don't have any money. There's going to be nothing, because they're going to say there's no money, right? So that means that to do anything at all, to build a road, to build a wind farm, whatever it might be, you need to leverage private finance. And Rachel Reeves knows this, because that is exactly what's happened with this £28 billion investment into renewables, in that she's taking advice from Rhian Mary Thomas, who's head of the Green Finance Institute, which is basically leveraging private finance to build renewables infrastructure, which is precisely what needs to happen. Now, that is the sort of language that business wants to hear, and not just for renewables infrastructure, but for other physical and digital infrastructure as well. We're going to have to reacquaint ourselves with a modernised version of PFI, because if we don't, nothing's going to happen and the entire country is going to come to a standstill. Now, every other country in Europe is doing this. That's how they do things, and they haven't particularly stopped doing it, to be honest with you. We talked in Orkney the other week about tunnels and fixed links and so on. All these countries that do these things do them by private finance. Now, that is what Rachel Reeves, I think, and to be honest, that's also what Kate Forbes needs to start saying when she goes to business audiences too, is that we are going to still accelerate development. We're still going to invest. We're not just going to sit back and wait till things get better automatically and just let you all waste away. We're going to invest in things and we're going to do things, but we're going to do it by leveraging private finance. It is the only way to do it, and we need to start having a grown-up conversation about that, which hopefully Rachel Reeves will start.
Yeah, just a very brief addendum to that. I mean, for those listeners who listen to the Stornoway and Kirkwall podcast, I listed just the anticipated expenditure required to unlock some of just a couple of the projects, actually, the offshore wind projects in close proximity to both of those areas. It is eye-watering amounts. The government, public finances cannot do this. They can pave the way and they can grease the wheels, but this is going to need the private sector to come in big time. So Andy's absolutely right with that. Just a little point about Kate Forbes. Let's look out for what she says next week. I think it's the programme for government next week, because clearly she had her kind of ground rules for becoming Deputy First Minister, and she's the Economy Secretary as well. So I would like to see what she has associated herself with in this programme for government, and I think you will see some of that private sector finance stuff coming into some of our portfolio area.
Right, I want to come back to the poll, just because we need to talk about the Alba Party and Reform UK as well, because this could be a kind of noticeable impact of the Alba Party, and indeed Reform UK. Shall we start with Reform UK, Andy? This poll reckons they would get 8 seats in the Scottish Parliament, mostly at the expense of the Conservatives.
Yes, so let me say on that at the outset, and hopefully nobody will remember come May 2026 if I'm totally wrong about this, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Feels like another bet's coming on.
I think we're in a reality.
Yeah, certainly. Have you paid the £100?
No. Do you know something? I need you to tell me who to write that out to, because I need to do that. I need you to tell me exactly who to make that transfer to, because that is going to be done.
Geoff Aberdein is the name.
Never trust a Tory.
I will do a public screen grab of it if you tell me who to send it to.
I will do.
Where was I? Reform. Yes.
Reform
Sorry.
UK.
I think we're still in reaction phase. To be honest, I find it quite difficult to believe that Reform will poll those sorts of numbers here. I don't think they will. I might be proven wrong, but I just don't think the message that they send when people sit down and think about it, and when we're in the midst of a Holyrood campaign and not still in an overhang from a Westminster campaign, which was dominated by small boats and things that are not actually an issue for a Holyrood campaign at all, I think they're just going to slip away. So I don't see that being a problem. However, I suppose the only thing I would say is that take Reform and Alba out of it as individual parties and as personalities. Forget about who's behind them and what they believe in and all that sort of stuff. But if you look across the board at the number of parties that are projected to win seats in this poll, that's what PR is supposed to deliver. So our peer parliaments in other countries over Europe that have PR, they have 8, 9, 10 political parties in them. Governments are made up of coalitions of 3, 4 and 5 parties. That is actually what's supposed to happen. We've been hampered here by basically the implanting of the Westminster party system onto our parliament, which probably should never have happened. And that has made it really difficult for parties to break through in any kind of sustained way. They have done before. Geoff mentioned a few of the parties that have won seats in the early days. They've come in, they've won a few seats, but then they've kind of fallen away. Nobody's really stayed the course. And at the moment, the 5 parties in the Holyrood Parliament are the same as the 5 parties in the Westminster Parliament. So this is what's supposed to happen. We are supposed to get more parties and have more variety. But I don't think that will happen in the form of Reform UK at the next election. I don't see it.
Okay. And so then we come to the Alba Party and the potential return of Alex Salmond, Geoff. This you've said on the podcast before that you're never a great encourager of this idea of Alex Salmond and his separate political party and all of that, but he might have some electoral success according to this poll.
Yeah, according to this poll, I'm sorry to dampen the hopes and aspirations of the Alba party followers, but I mean, I'm going back to my table of polls. It is only Norstat, and in its previous guise it was panel base, that have ever really shown, in the last 20-30 polls at least, anywhere near this kind of 5 or 4%. I think there was one Redfield and Wilton that had them up at a reasonable level, a similar level. They got 3.4% at the last Holyrood elections. That wasn't enough. He needs a narrative. He needs something to really chime. It hasn't worked for him so far. I mean, he's got to accept that himself. It just hasn't, because he's not been elected, and none of his MSPs or indeed MPs have been elected. So I just don't think the continuing chirping from the sidelines and niggling away at the SNP, fine if you want to hold them to account and certainly, but you've got to balance that with a clear narrative. They've tried to do the Scotland United thing. That hasn't been successful and perhaps that might change with John Swinney at the helm. I don't know, but he needs a real compelling reason. Otherwise, I just think it's going to be a tough ask for him to gain relevance. It's much easier to do it in the Scottish Parliament, and if anyone can do it, he's still got a huge amount of talent. I just don't think the talents are being put to the best use just now, if I'm being absolutely honest with you.
Do you know what though? There's loads of space in this Parliament for there are a lot. Let me put it the other way. There are significant views in this country that are not represented in the Parliament. There is space for more I mean, look at the poll that we did ahead of our 25 years of devolution, right? Lots of people want devolution, but with significantly more powers. There's not a single party in the Parliament that represents that. Lots of people want the Scottish Parliament abolished. There is not a party in the Scottish Parliament that represents that train of thought either. There is scope in this Parliament for 3 or 4 more credible political parties that represent quite significant schools of thought amongst the population. And at the moment, I think partly because we've been so dominated by the independence arguments over the last 10 years or so, partly because we are so dependent on Westminster in terms of the way that we conduct politics, and partly the media landscape and so on as well. We just haven't had that, but it will happen in future, and there are lots and lots of gaps for parties in this Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, and there's certainly a gap for people like Alba and perhaps even Reform to come in and I suppose my point is more, I'm trying to understand what his game plan is. He wanted the SNP to work with him on the Scotland United. They said no, right? So he's got to anticipate that that's not going to happen again. So what is my route in? How am I going to gain relevance at this contest? And I just, apart from being a bit anti-SNP, I'm not really seeing it yet. Now, he's got time, a bit of time. It's still 18 months. I would have much preferred, I've said it before, I'll say it again, much preferred if there was a non-party, pro-independence kind of umbrella movement that tried to align the stars outside of the SNP, so you're not relying on the SNP for all of the independence thinking that needs to go on, and I think that would have been better suited, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion, and I'm sure you will seek to prove me wrong.
Well, the thing I don't get, Geoff, right, and you will know better than me. The thing I don't get about Alba is, for me, they have no message other than we're the place where disgruntled SNP folk go when they fall out with the leadership, right? That's all. But if you look at the history of Alex Salmond, and we talk about the changes in the Scottish Government over the last 15-20 years quite a lot, but the history of Alex Salmond is as a sort of pragmatic, pro-economy, pro-growth nationalist, right? If you look at Alba's actual policy, because I remember doing it before our 25 years of devolution event when Salmond came on the podcast, if you look at their policy, they're to the left of the Scottish Government. They were to the left of the Scottish Government when the Greens were in. I mean, in terms of policy platform, it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the Salmond of 15 years ago. It's an uber left-wing platform, which to me just looks weird. I don't get where he's actually trying to take this.
I don't. Let's not. I mean, we're coming to the end now. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. Actually, I mean, I think some of his policies have been a lot more pragmatic. But I think your point is right, is that they just haven't really managed to get to the forefront of discourse. And that's very tough to do when you're a small party, clearly. But all they're being labelled as just now is the disgruntled SNP, you know, and have a crack at them. That's my overarching point. You need to establish yourself a core policy platform, and I don't think it would serve them well, my opinion, to go lefter. I think, look at what the Labour Party are doing. They're trying to emulate what the SNP did in 2007, as we discussed earlier. So I don't think it would serve the SNP or Alba to go left at that, my opinion. Just my opinion again. I'm sure lots of people will disagree, but it's a tall order for them, I would say.
Yeah. Guys, thank you very much. Thank you. We really picked that apart today, which is really, really good. One thing to mention is this story that's floating around this week about SNP ministers considering ending free subsidies. This was reported by The Times. And I think this is something that we'll return to next week in the programme for government, because we'll get more. This was the kind of speculation about university tuition and bus travel and school meals and free prescriptions. All of these things on the table as part of cost cutting. But I think what we'll do is we'll hold off on that until we actually hear the programme for government and what is and isn't going to happen.
Makes sense, and I'm sure we've got a few anoraks amongst our listeners. Would highly recommend the Scottish Fiscal Commission report. It's actually fascinating, and it shows you how the interrelationship with the UK government and decisions they're making impacts the Scottish government, but also the decisions that the Scottish government themselves have made is having on public finances. It's utterly fascinating. It's really worth a read. It explains it. It's a really good explainer.
Yeah. So I think it's just worth noting that we are aware that that is bubbling, that we are kind of into it, but we'll hold off until the programme for government tells us what exactly is going on with that. Stay with us. Join us again next week for that. Join us over the course of the weekend. You'll hear our podcast from the pub at SNP Party Conference in Edinburgh as well. We're looking forward to that. Geoff and Andy, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends. Let's add to the brilliant people who are listening to Holyrood Sources. We're so glad to have you there. Lots more to come, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe, and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.